I am mildly worried that Capcom may have purchased a firearm from their local ammunition, loaded it with 9 rounds, and pointed it directly at their foot. Why do I say this? Well, it's because Monster Hunter Rise had a critical problem at launch, and while Capcom was able to find a clever solution to it, they might bring it right back with Sunbreak. Nargacuga weapons in Rise were basically just a better version of every single other weapon. The reason for this is actually pretty simple. Everyone who's ever played a video game knows what a critical hit is. They're in most video games, Monster Hunter being no exception. Your crit rate is just called affinity instead. Most weapons in this game have 0%. Some go into the negatives like this one with 20, and some go as high as 10 or even 15%. Nargacuga weapons have 50. This by itself is insane. These weapons crit on average about 40% more often than any other weapon. But Capcom wasn't done there, oh no. They thought, you know what? Let's give them some crazy damage modifiers too. In Monster Hunter, there are sharpness modifiers for your weapons. Here's a scale. Where do you think Nargacuga, yeah, they're right here. So how did they fix it? What would you do if you accidentally created a relatively large problem in a game you made? Well, generally, you patch it. For example, if you have a boss that a large part of the community thinks is far too powerful, you could nerf them. I'm not saying that was the right or wrong choice, it was just an example. There are certainly arguments to be made for both sides, but it's not really what this video is about. I do not advocate for the nerfing, buffing, or removal of Starscourge Radahn or any of Celestial contemporaries. There is, however, another way to approach the issue when something is a bit too strong. You could just make everything else better. You know, the whole when everyone is super and all that. Personally, I prefer this method as it gives more options to the player, although I do admit it can go a bit too far sometimes. That said, Capcom chose the second option and added something to Monster Hunter Rise that saved the balance of the game. That something came in the form of new weapons. Now, Elder Dragons were the first step. Check out this longsword. It's got 220 attack, which is huge compared to the Nargacuga's relatively small 180. But it's also got 15% affinity and just as many slots for customization. All of these factors together put it on par, if not above, the Nargacuga longsword. And that's not the only weapon that got a new contender. See, with these patches and updates, Rampage weapons were also given a new coat of paint. With the upgrades afforded to them, they stood on top as some of the best, if not the best, weapons in their classes. But there are still some examples of Narga being the best weapon in a class. Check out the Chargeblade. Narga's Chargeblade is probably the best Chargeblade, speaking strictly from a numbers perspective. But if you look at the other options available, they're pretty competitive. Rajang's Chargeblade, for example, could outperform it if the monster is weak enough to thunder or if you're going for a specific playstyle. All of this is to say that while Nargacuga weapons were pretty overpowered at the beginning of Rise, they were quickly brought back down to earth and the playing field was leveled. But Sunbreak is where things get a little complicated. Take a look at this. Notice how all of Nargacuga's weapons stop pretty early on the upgrade tree. The reason for this is because part of Capcom's solution to the initial problem was to neglect them. They simply didn't give them new upgrades. But now that Sunbreak is coming, they might have to change that. A large part of the reason why Nargacuga weapons fell behind was this lack of upgrades. So now if they upgrade the Narga weapons again, could they accidentally put them right back on top? Well, maybe, but I don't think it'll happen. The fact that Capcom fixed this balance issue in the base game pretty much confirms that they understand how and why it happened, and that it's a potential problem. With this knowledge, I think it's extremely unlikely that they make the exact same mistake again. If I had to guess, they'll likely continue to have high sharpness, likely natural purple, but their raw will falter, and they may not even upgrade the affinity at all. In the end, they'll likely still be very competitive weapons, but with the new monsters we're getting, they certainly won't be the force of nature that they were before. But speaking of new monsters, only one of these two can get into Sunbreak, and I think I figured out which one it is. So click here to find out.